Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our next session is titled The Built Environment in the Context of Climate Change. Please join me in welcoming Prince Rahim Agha Khan, Chairman of Environment and Climate Committee of the Agha Khan Development.
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I would like to begin by expressing my gratitude to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE and ruler of Dubai, and to His Excellency Omar Sultan Al Alama, Director General of the Prime Minister's Office, Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence, and Director of the World Government Summit Organization, for inviting me to speak today. Since its founding a decade ago, this summit has enabled the exchange of ideas to advance progress on an array of complex and profound global challenges. The people invited here have the power to influence events, to do great things, and to shape the future, and it is a privilege to join them at this summit. We are all here to engage in focused and ongoing dialogue about the complexities and trade-offs of such progress, because only through dialogue can we ensure that we make well-informed and wise decisions for the betterment of all our societies. Looking through this lens, as Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee of the Agha Khan Development Network, I would like to talk about urbanization in the developing world against the backdrop of climate change. People are on the move like never before. We are fast becoming an urban world, and the scale and pace of this change is breathtaking. By the middle of this century, it is estimated that 8 out of 10 people will live in cities, with much of this urbanization taking place in the developing world. How we plan, design, and manage cities in the developing world, therefore, will be of vital importance both for our fragile planet and for humanity. In this time of rapid and often unplanned urbanization, I would like to touch on 3 particularly daunting areas of challenge for us now and in the future: infrastructure, health, and emissions. First, infrastructure. As cities quickly expand, there is a risk that their infrastructure will fall further behind the increased needs of their growing populations, and that the expansion will not happen in an environmentally sustainable way. As we look at the future of urban planning, we must put clean infrastructure at the heart of the design and development process if we want any chance of mitigating further global warming. This means designing buildings which minimize heat gain or loss, using green building materials and rooftop solar panels in all future construction, prioritizing walking and cycling paths, and ensuring that there is safe, quick, and reliable public transport that is powered by clean energy, among other imperatives. In essence, putting sustainability into the heart of our urban infrastructure must become a core requirement as we move forward. Second, health. Throughout the last centuries, the health of city dwellers increasingly benefited from better access to education and health care, improved living conditions, and targeted public health interventions. But today, that benefit is less apparent, with hundreds of millions of urban dwellers lacking adequate sanitation or access to clean water, threatened by heat stress, air pollution, or suffering the effects of air and waterborne disease, all exacerbated by climate change. Recognizing these issues and devising public policy and service responses to address them will become increasingly important. Finally, emissions. Although our cities occupy just 3% of the Earth's land, they account for 80% of the energy consumption and at least 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. Because cities play such a massive role in the coming decades, they need not only to anticipate and adapt to climate change, but they must also contribute to its mitigation. We must rapidly and intentionally reduce greenhouse gas emissions from urban centers, as well as use every available solution to draw down greenhouse gases already emitted. And here, research and technology hold huge promise to deliver on that reduction if they're championed by inspired and enlightened governments, businesses, and civil society all working together. So how to ensure that global city design incorporates resilience and a sustainable foundation in the future? On an environmental level, we need to ensure that energy is produced and natural resources and land are used in a sustainable manner. And on a governance level, strong leadership and competent management is key. We need integrated approaches to issues around urban planning and dialogue to drive good decision-making. On both these levels, environmental and governance, the power of partnership will be paramount. Government, business, and civil society must work together to unlock the best possible future for our cities. At the Aga Development Network, we have first-hand experience of the value of successful partnership between government, business, and civil society. For several decades now, the AKDN has been engaged in preserving, restoring, and developing the built environment, historic buildings and public places of practical and cultural significance. Our work is always rooted in Islamic ethics and tradition. The Quran teaches us that as God's noblest creation, humankind is entrusted with the stewardship of all that is on earth, and that each generation must leave for its successors a wholesome and healthy social and physical environment. Stewardship of the environment, care for the natural world, sharing of resources, recognition of beauty as a divine blessing, and environmental ethic are the principles that help guide the planning of early Muslim cities. So in our contemporary efforts, the goal has not been simply to honor past cultural milestones, but also to create an environmentally sustainable basis for economic and social progress. One example of this work is the Al-Azhar Park project in Cairo. Created on the site of a garbage dump, it was developed to provide a new space that could make a major positive contribution to the quality of the lives of people in Cairo. The park was opened in 2005 as part of a larger urban rehabilitation initiative, which has delivered education and health services, monument restoration, infrastructure upgrading, vocational training, and microcredit to the area. As a result of the project, we have found that family earnings have increased 1/3 faster than in the other areas of Old Cairo. Literacy has climbed by 25%, and over 20 million people have visited the park to date. Covering 81 acres in a densely populated metropolis, the park provides a place where citizens can take in the serene beauty, find refuge from the summer heat, and breathe clean air amidst vegetation that sequesters 750 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. This is a shining example of what sustainability-minded partnership can unblock for urban populations. It is our hope that we can share our experience with more partners in the future to help create environments where urban communities are set up to thrive in harmony with the natural world. Ladies and gentlemen, this forum, the World Government Summit, is a fantastic opportunity to raise our common ambitions, to share big ideas, and to inspire positive action in global city design to build a better, more harmonious, and more environmentally sustainable future for humanity and our planet. It is a true honor to be part of writing this next chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Highness, for this main address.
الحضور الكريم، نستمع الآن لكلمة رئيسية لمعالي الدكتور محمد سليمان الجاسر رئيس مجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Sulaiman Al-Jasir, Chairman of the Islamic Development Bank.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Your Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President and Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates and ruler of Dubai, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to express the Islamic Development Bank's and my heartfelt condolences to our brothers and sisters in Syria and Turkey for the suffering they have borne because of the earthquakes. May Allah have mercy on those who perished and have mercy on those who will recover, inshallah. Our prayers go to them. Let me first express my sincere thanks and gratitude to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President of the United Arab Emirates and Prime Minister and the ruler of Dubai, for the opportunity to speak to you today. Secondly, I wish to applaud the vision to bring the worlds together through this formal platform to shape the future of governments. At the Islamic Development Bank Group, we attach great significance to these meetings, which provide an avenue to analyze the critical development challenges affecting the world and how to address them. I am happy to share some insights on the impact of the regulatory frameworks and governance on socioeconomic development and investment. Reassessing this key issue is akin to revisiting the fundamentals of long-term economic development. Today, we view it against heightened global turbulence and uncertainty. Indeed, the world economy is still facing the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and suffering from the repercussions of the crisis in Eastern Europe, with persistent inflationary pressures, threats of food and energy crises, high uncertainty, and tight financial conditions. Against this background, fears of global recession and stagflation have been mounting among economists and business leaders. At this juncture of the competing and compelling priorities, global leaders and decision-makers need to keep abreast of the fundamentals and imperatives of long-term economic development. It goes without saying that the investment in physical, human, and social capital, as well as in technology to build competitiveness and spur lasting growth, is imperative. Such investments should be geared towards ensuring sustainability, equity, and inclusiveness. Indeed, they should harness and embrace digital transformation, build on the public, private, and civil society partnerships, and respond to the environmental, social, and governance standards. I firmly believe that the success of these long-term investments hinge on one crucial factor, which is governance. Beyond the neoclassical growth model, modern theory highlights the critical role of institutions in explaining development performance. In their book, Why Nations Fail, published in 2012, Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson used decades of institutional data to prove that development failures is intrinsically related to the failure of governance. On the other hand, evidence has shown a robust positive relationship between an improved regulatory environment and aggregate investment, and thus economic growth. Countries stand to gain from a broad push for streamlining business regulations and procedures. Actually, macroeconomic and structural policies, when coupled with good governance, promote an enabling environment which fosters rapid and sustained economic growth. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, regulatory framework and governance should ensure market transparency and efficiency, thereby addressing market failures by using suitable incentive mechanisms. Needless to say, when the regulatory framework is weak or poorly implemented, it can slow business responsiveness, divert resources away from productive investments, hamper market access, reduce job creation, and discourage entrepreneurship. In the same vein, clarity and stability are at the core of investment decision-making, as investors generally tend to avoid unpredictable and unstable environments, particularly when large capital requirements are involved. Here, I am tempted to rephrase the famous proverb, "An apple a day keeps the doctor away," into "a dose of unpredictability a day keeps the investors away." I hasten to add that an effective regulatory framework is not a one-size-fits-all. Regulatory frameworks should reflect and adjust to the domestic socio-political context. However, they must meet three intertwined critical criteria: clarity, agility, and effectiveness. In a proper environment, agility goes hand in hand with good governance, and governance should not be at the expense of efficiency and effectiveness. To reconcile this, technology can help with process re-engineering. We have seen how some emerging economies have succeeded in establishing special economic zones with well-designed regulatory frameworks and governance structures, thus attracting foreign direct investment in competitive activities and high-growth sectors. The regulatory design of these zones may be borrowed as a template to spur growth in other sectors. Sound regulatory framework and good governance are not a one-off event, nor are they a panacea for the ills of sustainable development. Rather, they are important tools to help lay down the necessary rules which nourish fair and efficient conditions underlying sustainable prosperity, peace, and stability. Excellencies, distinguished participants, as the president of a multilateral development institution whose member countries are either emerging or developing economies spanning 4 continents, I recognize how government effectiveness makes a big difference in development effectiveness. In fact, when government strategies, rules, and regulations are well designed, explained, and implemented, and when institutions uphold property rights, transparency, and accountability, resources are then optimally allocated. This builds trust between governments and investors, domestic and foreign alike, hence promoting economic growth. In many of our member countries, we have seen how this has led to qualitative transformation, significantly reducing poverty and improving the living conditions of the population. We have also seen how many of our rich resource member countries have broken the so-called natural resource curse, according to which countries endowed with natural resources perform worse economically than countries endowed with few natural resources. Actually, these countries have performed well thanks to good governance, sound policies, and a solid institutional framework backed by sound leadership. In the context of our deliberations at this 2023 World Government Summit, what matters most is how effective governments are at building trust that promotes investment and economic growth. Government effectiveness is achieved by a strong leadership that pursues good governance, develops sound and predictable policies, and builds solid institutional frameworks. In many developing countries, regulatory reform will take time as it needs to break decades or even centuries of institutional fragility that has been ingrained in socio-cultural practices. This raises the urgency of reform in governance, and the time to act is now. Thank you very much for your attention. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
نشكر معاليكم على هذه الكلمة الرئيسية.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this main address.
أصحاب السمو والمعالي، الحضور الكريم، نستمع الآن لكلمة رئيسية لسمو الشيخ أحمد نواف الأحمد الصباح، رئيس وزراء دولة الكويت.
Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Highness Sheikh Ahmed Nawaf Al-Ahmad Al-Sabah, Prime Minister of the State of Kuwait.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سمو الشيخ محمد بن راشد آل مكتوم، نائب رئيس دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة، رئيس مجلس الوزراء وحاكم دبي، أصحاب السمو والمعالي والسعادة، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نجتمع اليوم في أبرز حدث عالمي يناقش سبل التعاون بين الحكومات لدعم جهود التنمية العالمية، ويتشرف مستقبل الإنسان في ظل عالم يموج بالتغييرات المضطربة. إن هذا التجمع العالمي والذي جاء تحت شعار استشراف مستقبل الحكومات يعكس الرؤية الحكيمة والنظرة الثاقبة للقيادة الرشيدة في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة الشقيقة، التي تمكنت رغم التحديات من تقديم نسخة استثنائية حظيت بإعجاب واهتمام العالم أجمع. وفي هذه المناسبة لا يفوتني إلا أن أجدد الثناء لكافة الجهود الوطنية المبذولة التي ساهمت بالإعداد والترتيب والتجهيز المميز لهذا التجمع العالمي، مثمنين دعوة سموكم الكريمة بأن أكون متواجد معكم اليوم ضمن أعمال القمة التاسعة، آملين أن تحظى أعمال قمتنا هذه بالنجاح والتوفيق لما تمثله من منارة عالمية ومنصة معرفية دولية تهدف إلى مواجهة التحديات المتسارعة التي تواجه حكوماتنا اليوم، لا سيما في ظل الأوضاع الاستثنائية غير المسبوقة التي يواجهها العالم، والتي تتطلب عملاً جماعياً لمواجهتها والتصدي لها. ولا يفوتني باسم حكومة وشعب الكويت أن أتقدم لشعب الجمهورية العربية السورية وحكومة وشعب الجمهورية التركية بأسمى آيات التعازي لضحايا الزلزال الذي وقع بهما، سائلين الله عز وجل أن يتغمد الضحايا بواسع رحمته ويلهم ذويهم الصبر والسلوان ويمن على الجرحى بالصحة والعافية، كما نؤكد دعم كافة جهود الإغاثة حتى تستقر الأوضاع بهما بإذن الله. إننا نجتمع اليوم في ظل تحديات عديدة وظروف دقيقة واستثنائية تواجه المنطقة والعالم، تقودها مسألة عالمية جديدة وضعت حكومات العالم أمام خيارات صعبة أزاء كيفية التعامل مع تداعياتها وتلبية متطلباتها على نحو يجعل من مبدأ التفكير في مستقبل نماذج الحكومات من الضروريات الحتمية في وقتنا المعاصر، وفي مقدمتها نموذج الحكومات المعرفية لأكثر قدرة على حل المشكلات ومواجهة التحديات وإدارة الأزمات وتعزيز الريادة التنافسية والتنوع الاقتصادي. أصحاب السمو والمعالي والسعادة، لقد زاد الاهتمام بموضوع نموذج الحكومات المستقبلية بعد اتساع دائرة المسألة العالمية الجديدة التي تتسم بالتناقضات ما بين أزمات وصراعات وثورة معرفية ومعلومية ورقمية متسارعة تقود نماذج أعمال مبتكرة غير محدودة وعقوداً وتعاملات ذكية مبنية على تقنيات متطورة تتيح تطبيقات وحلول مستقبلية بآفاق تتسع للعديد من المجالات كالاقتصادية والاستشارية والطاقة ومدن المستقبل والسياحة والأسواق المعرفية والخدمات التعليمية والصحية والتعاملات المالية والإدارية والتطبيقات السيبرانية التي تنطلق من بيئة أعمال مشفرة لا مركزية، علاوة على تعاقب الأزمات الاقتصادية والمالية وما ترتب عليها من مخاطر ذات تداعيات وآثار عمقت من جسامة التغيير المناخي وصعوبة مكافحة الفقر وندرة المياه واستنزاف الموارد وغيرها من الأزمات التي خلقت عالماً يتسم بالغموض والمخاطر والتفاعل اللحظي والتغيير السريع في مشهد شكل فضاء دولياً جديداً غير مسبوق ونقطة تحول جوهرية في مفهوم العمل الحكومي ضمن دائرة التنافس والتكامل والتفاعل الدولي والإقليمي. أصحاب السمو والمعالي والسعادة، لقد خطت دولة الكويت خطوات واثقة نحو تنفيذ خططها وبرنامجها الحكومية لتحقيق رؤية دولة الكويت 2035 في تحويلها إلى مركز مالي وتجاري إقليمي وعالمي جاذب للاستثمار، واتخذت إجراءات جادة نحو تسريع التحول التكنولوجي والرقمي والتقني وتطوير بيئة العمل والهياكل الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والبيئية بما يتواكب مع طموحاتها التنموية ويتفق مع مبادئ وأهداف التنمية المستدامة 2030. وعلى الصعيد الدولي فقد حققت دولة الكويت إنجازاً علمياً جديداً تمثل في إطلاق أول قمر صناعي لها من ولاية فلوريدا الأمريكية، ويأتي هذا المشروع نتيجة تعاون علمي بين جامعة الكويت وتمويل من مؤسسة الكويت للتقدم العلمي تحت شعار الكويت إلى الفضاء، وذلك بعد عمل دؤوب استمر لمدة 3 سنوات بفريق كويتي شاب وهو أيضاً نتاج تعاون إقليمي مع مركز الشيخ محمد بن راشد للفضاء، وتعاون عالمي مع جامعة بوردر في ولاية كولورادو. وفي الختام لا يسعني إلا أن أجدد الشكر والتقدير على هذه الدعوة وعلى الجهود المبذولة لإنجاح هذا التجمع العالمي للحكومات. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
نشكر سمو الشيخ أحمد نواف الأحمد الصباح رئيس وزراء دولة الكويت على هذه الكلمة الرئيسية.
Thank you, Your Highness, for this main address. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session is titled Future-Proofing Labour Markets, Preparing for a Rapidly Changing World. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Gilbert Humbo, Director General of the International Labour Organization.
Your Highness, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President of the United Arab Emirates, Prime Minister and ruler of Dubai, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation for being invited to this 10th World Government Summit. 2 years ago, in 2021, when the world was still battling the COVID-19 pandemic, the International Labour Conference, ILC, adopted the global call to action for a human-centered recovery that is inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. Today, at a time where the world is facing multiple challenges, it is time for increased solidarity within and across nations. Today, this summit could not be more pertinent. According to our ILO most recent reports, global employment growth will be just 1% in 2023, less than half the level it was in 2022. And the global unemployment is projected to rise by 3 million in 2023 to 208 million, and roughly the same amount in 2024. In addition, decent work deficit very likely, unfortunately, will remain. We estimated that 473 million will have liked to have a job in 2022, but did not have one. This is what we call the global job gap. Of these, 205 million are actively searching for a job and are classified what we commonly know as unemployed. The remaining 268 million people are not actively searching for a job for several reasons. We know 2 billion workers are in the informal economy. 214 million workers live in extreme poverty. And progress in reducing poverty is too slow in part of the world. The number of working poor is increasing in low-income countries. So let us make no mistake. our collective goal of a sustainable, human-centered recovery founded on a social justice is under threat. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, this is indeed a cause of concern, and if I may even say of an alarm, because behind these statistics are people. Behind these statistics are families and communities. It is those living in middle and low-income economies who are suffering the most, deepening inequalities within and among nations. Geopolitical conflict, inflation, monetary tightening, and great uncertainty are but some of the factors depressing the outlook for labor markets. High food and energy price inflation, along with rising interest rates, are further complicating daily life of workers and small businesses. All of this is putting additional pressure on labor markets around the world and is pushing social progress backward. But while the picture is bleak and the outlook uncertain, we must not lose sight of our vision for a better future of work. And in the search of sustainable solutions to these current and long-term challenges, there is a common denominator: the need for social justice. That's because the issues we are facing in the world of work are not just about numbers on a page, they are about charts, ledgers, or profit and loss. Even when we talk about labor markets, we are in some way missing the point, because in essence, all these challenges are about people. That's why social justice is about. That's what social justice is about: giving people equality of opportunity, the right to a dignified life, the chance to live in fair and peaceful societies. Decent work, such as access to jobs, right at work, social protection, and social dialogue, is key to advancing social justice. Investing in social protection systems, as envisaged by the ILO Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protections, such investment will prevent millions of families from falling into poverty and will bring millions out of poverty. The skilling and reskilling of workers will create opportunities out of technological change and a just green transition. I seize this opportunity to praise the effort of the UAE government to upscale its workforce. Indeed, for government and economies to stay competitive, workers need to be empowered by acquiring up-to-date skills and understanding of emerging trends in the sectors in which they work. Investing in the people's capabilities help preparing them for the future transformations in the world of work, and positively affect performance, services, and productivity. The ILO Constitution represents the most ambitious social contract in history. As we look to the future, we need governments, employers, and workers' organizations to reinvigorate their social contract to meet the challenge we face. They must ensure that working people receive a just share of economic progress, protection against risk, and respect for their rights in return for their continuing contribution to the economy. Social justice, development, and economic growth are not mutually exclusive. They are inextricably linked. They are dovetailed. However, none will be achieved unless we work together. We need the commitment of the entire multilateral system, bilaterals, partners, and stakeholders to fight inequality, exclusion, and marginalization. To this end, ILO will launch a global coalition for social justice later this year, together with a wide range of partners. The coalition will build on that commitment to the SDGs to ensure that social justice is prioritized in national and global policy making, development cooperation, and in financial, trade, and investment agreements. Skeptics may say that it will be impossible for all these groups to come together. But I really want to believe that it will not be easy, but it is possible. We saw how countries working together when they faced challenges such as COVID-19 pandemic. The fact is that we cannot afford not to. What is needed is commitment. What is needed is action. Without both, social justice will be just another slogan, and we cannot afford it. So I count on all of you for this cause. Thank you so much.
أصحاب السمو والمعالي، الحضور الكريم، نستمع لكلمة رئيسية لمعالي نجلاء بودن رمضان، رئيسة حكومة الجمهورية التونسية.
Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Nejla Bouden Ramadan, Head of Government, Republic of Tunisia.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن راشد آل مكتوم، نائب رئيس الدولة، رئيس مجلس الوزراء، حاكم دبي، أصحاب الفخامة والسمو والمعالي، حضرات السيدات والسادة. إنه لمن دواعي سروري أن أكون اليوم بينكم في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة الشقيقة للمشاركة في القمة العالمية للحكومات، تلبية لدعوة كريمة من أخي صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن راشد آل مكتوم. ولا يفوتني بهذه المناسبة أن أنقل تحيات سيادة رئيس الجمهورية الأستاذ قيس سعيد إلى صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد آل نهيان رئيس الدولة، وأن أشيد بما تحقق في هذا البلد العربي الأصيل من معالم النهضة الشاملة والتقدم، تكريساً لرؤية المؤسس الأب الشيخ زايد بن سلطان آل نهيان طيب الله ثراه. أصحاب الفخامة والسمو والمعالي، حضرات السيدات والسادة، لقد شكلت القمة العالمية للحكومات منذ تأسيسها سنة 2013 منصة للتحاور بين حكومات العالم ومحطة هامة لقراءة التوجهات العالمية المستقبلية والاستعداد لمجابهة الأزمات القادمة من خلال الاستشراف وبناء القدرات والمرونة في الأداء والابتكار. وإن قمتنا اليوم تأتي في ظرف إقليمي ودولي بالغ التعقيد، نتيجة استمرار تداعيات جائحة كوفيد-19 وآثار الحرب الروسية الأوكرانية وما سببته من تفاقم في أزمة الغذاء والطاقة، إضافة طبعاً إلى التغيرات المناخية والكوارث الطبيعية وتعدد بؤر النزاعات وتفاقم اللجوء والهجرة غير النظامية. كل هذه التغيرات التي نعيشها اليوم ستؤثر بلا أدنى شك على السياسات العالمية المستقبلية التي يجب أن تصاغ في إطار التضامن الدولي والأخذ بعين الاعتبار للتفاوت التنموي بين الدول، وبالتالي بين جاهزية الحكومات وكيفية مجابهتها لتحديات المستقبل. فالحكومات وإن كانت تعول على مجهوداتها الوطنية الذاتية بدرجة أولى، فإنها بحاجة أيضاً إلى محيط دولي ملائم يساعدها على تنفيذ سياساتها وتحقيق تطلعات شعوبها. أصحاب الفخامة والسمو والمعالي، حضرات السيدات والسادة، لقد تأثرت تونس كسائر دول العالم بالأزمات الراهنة، وكان هذا التأثير مضاعفاً حيث جاءت في وقت تفاقمت فيه التجاذبات السياسية على حساب الإدارة الحكومية وعلى حساب المواطن التونسي، وتردت الخدمات وتضاعفت المديونية، وكان لزاماً علينا كحكومة جديدة مواجهة تركة وتراكم عشرية من الزمن أدت إلى أزمة اقتصادية واجتماعية خانقة. وفي هذا السياق أثبتت الإدارة الحكومية التونسية على قدرتها على الصمود، وعملت على حشد الطاقات الوطنية باعتماد مقاربة تشاركية شمولية بهدف رسم الإصلاحات والبرامج اللازمة للخروج من الأزمة واستعادة الحركية الاقتصادية واسترجاع التوازنات المالية وتحقيق الاستقرار الاقتصادي والمالي بما يدعم الثقة في الداخل والخارج ويستجيب لمختلف التحديات القائمة. وقد أقرت الإدارة الحكومية التونسية جملة من البرامج التصحيحية على أساس التوفيق بين ما هو عاجل وضروري لتعزيز النمو والاستدامة بثقة المستثمرين والفاعلين الاقتصاديين من جهة، وما هو هيكلي وعميق لإرسال مقومات اقتصاد قوي ومرن وأكثر تنافسية من ناحية أخرى. ففي باب الإجراءات العاجلة سنت الحكومة حزمة من التدابير الضرورية التي تهدف إلى استعادة ثقة الفاعلين الاقتصاديين والمحافظة على النسيج المؤسساتي والنهوض بمناخ الأعمال وتحسين التموقع التنافسي لبلادنا. أما على المدى المتوسط والبعيد فقد أعدت الحكومة بمشاركة موسعة للخبرات الوطنية البرنامج الوطني للإصلاحات المتضمن لعدة محاور، منها تحرير المبادرة وتكريس قواعد المنافسة النزيهة ودعم صلابة القطاع المالي وتطوير أداء وكفاءة القطاع العمومي ودعم الإدماج الاجتماعي. كما صادقت الحكومة على مخطط التنمية الاقتصادي والاجتماعي للفترة 23-25 باعتباره الوثيقة المرجعية للسياسات والبرامج والمشاريع العمومية والإصلاحات ضمن رؤية تونس 2035 والمتمثلة في منوال تنموي جديد يرتكز على التجديد والإدماج والاستدامة، والقائمة على عدة ركائز من بينها تثمين رأس المال البشري الذي يعتبر قوام التنمية المستدامة والشاملة، الاقتصاد المعرفة محرك للابتكار والتجديد، اقتصاد تنافسي ومتنوع داعم المبادرة الخاصة، دعم الاقتصاد الأخضر لتحقيق التنمية المستدامة، تنمية جهوية عادلة وتهيئة ترابية دامجة، والعدالة الاجتماعية كأساس التماسك الاجتماعي. كما صادقت الإدارة الحكومية التونسية على استراتيجيات مجمل القطاعات على غرار الاستراتيجيات في أفق 2035 للصناعة والتجديد وتحسين مناخ الأعمال والانتقال الإيكولوجي، وكذلك استراتيجية التنمية ذات الانبعاثات الضعيفة وصامدة لتغيير المناخ في أفق 2050، فضلاً عن إبرام مواثيق التنافسية القطاعية في قطاعات النسيج والصناعات الصيدلية ومكونات السيارات، والنظر في اعتماد مواثيق جديدة في قطاعات أخرى. وترمي كل هذه الاستراتيجيات إلى تكريس السيادة الوطنية وتحقيق الأمن الغذائي والطاقي والمائي. أصحاب الفخامة والسمو والمعالي، حضرات السيدات والسادة، في إطار السياسة الطاقية للحكومة قمنا بتسريع نسق طلبات العروض لمشاريع إنتاج الكهرباء من الطاقات المتجددة في مجال الطاقة الشمسية وطاقة الرياح في إطار نظام اللزمات والشراكة بين القطاع العام والقطاع الخاص. كما قمنا بترفيع نسبة إنتاج الكهرباء المأمولة في أفق 2030 من 30% إلى 35%، إضافة إلى انتهاج خيار التحكم في الطاقة والنجاعة الطاقية والتنوع الطاقي على غرار الهيدروجين الأخضر. وفي إطار التعاون مع شركائنا الأوروبيين، نحن على وشك إطلاق مشروع الماد الذي يربط تونس وجنوب إيطاليا بخط كهربائي ذوي ضغط عال من الطاقة المتجددة، ولمرافقة مشاريع الانتقال الطاقي ولدعمها بالكفاءات العالية في أحدث التقنيات. شرعنا في إحداث مركز الامتياز الإفريقي في الطاقات المتجددة في مجال التكوين والبحث العلمي، والذي سيمكن من تأهيل الكفاءات على المستوى الوطني والإفريقي. كما نعمل على بعث مشاريع استراتيجية كبرى مندمجة، من أهمها مشروع النقل الهيدروليكي للفوسفات الذي انطلقنا في دراساته الأولية، وهو مشروع مندمج ومتكامل يتنزل في إطار شراكة بين القطاعين العام والخاص، متكون من محطة لتحليل مياه البحر ومحطة لإنتاج الكهرباء في الطاقة الشمسية ومنشآت للتخزين ووحدة نموذجية لإنتاج الهيدروجين الأخضر بهدف تطوير الأمونيا الخضراء. أصحاب الفخامة والسمو والمعالي، حضرات السيدات والسادة، إن أهم الثوابت التي تقوم عليها تونس هي المراهنة على رأس المال البشري الذي سيواكب تنفيذ الإصلاحات وسيرفع التحديات المستقبلية. فمن فكت الكفاءات التونسية وطنياً ودولياً تفرض نفسها وتترك بصمتها في عديد المجالات، ولا سيما في مجال المؤسسات الناشئة، على غرار الشركة الناشئة إنستاديب التونسية التي تنشط في مجال الذكاء الاصطناعي بتطبيقات في الصحة والبيوتكنولوجيا، والتي وقع دمجها في شركة بيونتك، والتي أسسها تونسيين شابين زهرة وكريم، وكذلك المؤسسة الناشئة كوموليس التي تحول رطوبة الهواء على ماء صالح للشراب. غير أن هذا لا يحجب عنا أن هجرة الأدمغة وأيضاً هجرة شبابنا أصبحت اليوم تشكل لدينا هاجساً كبيراً، وهو ما يستدعي منا وضع السياسات والبرامج التي تشجع كفاءاتنا على البقاء في تونس والعودة إليها. أصحاب الفخامة والسمو والمعالي، حضرات السيدات والسادة، إن تاريخ تونس العريق وحضارتها الممتدة لآلاف السنين وموقعها الاستراتيجي بالغ الأهمية جعلها عبر العصور بوابة إفريقيا ومعبراً إلى أوروبا وجسراً يربط الشمال بالجنوب والشرق بالغرب ومنبراً علمياً، كما جعلها وجهة للاستثمار والمستثمرين. وبالرغم من دقة المرحلة التي نعيشها، فقد احتضنت تونس قمتين دوليتين هامتين، وهما قمة طوكيو الدولية حول التنمية بالإفريقيا تيكاد 8، والقمة 18 للفرنكوفونية المنعقدة في شهرين 8 و11 لسنة 2022. وأسفرت القمتان عن نتائج هامة وبرامج تعاون أكدت بشهادة جميع المشاركين أن النجاح هو قدر التونسيات والتونسيين، ولن نرضى لغير ذلك بديلاً، وأننا سنحقق التعافي المستدام حتى تكون تونس كما يريد لها شعبها أن تكون، أرضاً للحرية والديمقراطية والإبداع والابتكار والنمو الدائم والمستدام. وفي الختام اسمحوا لي أن أجدد شكري على حفاوة الاستقبال وكرم الضيافة وحسن تنظيم هذه القمة التي أعتقد جازمة أن نتائج أعمالها ستساهم في مزيد توضيح الرؤى وانسجامها، وستساعد على تطوير آليات كفيلة بتحقيق مستقبل أفضل لأجيال القادمة. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
نشكر معالي نجلاء بودن رمضان على هذه الكلمة الرئيسية.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this main address.
أيها الحضور الكريم، سنستأنف الجلسة التالية بعد قليل.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will resume our next session shortly.
We live in a world of plenty, yet so many don't have enough. Our world is constantly evolving. New opportunities come with countless decisions. But how can we champion positive change and mitigate risks, and use our collective strength to empower and leave no one behind? The truth is, our every action shapes the lives of many. Accelerating development and governance is laying the groundwork for the future of societies and healthcare. Exploring new frontiers pushes the boundaries of knowledge and increases our resilience and connectivity. Reinventing the world that surrounds us is putting the focus back on the very thing that made us excel. Join us as we explore new ways in shaping the future. World Government Summit, Shaping Future Governments.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next panel discussion is titled Sustainability, Drivers and Barriers for Government. This session is moderated by Dan Murphy from CNBC. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dan Murphy. I'm from CNBC. It's great to have you all with us this afternoon and to share some of your time with us. We appreciate it, and welcome into our next panel conversation. So this session is on sustainability, the drivers and barriers for governments. It is a critical topic as COP28 comes into the UAE later on this year, and as the energy crisis continues to impact markets and drives technological adaptation around our region. Governments around the region are also coming under some pretty intense scrutiny, some intense pressure to diversify and to transition to lower carbon economies while also protecting economic growth. So we have a lot to talk about today. And I am thrilled to be joined by a really esteemed panel as well. They are brilliant, they are diverse, but there is a common thread here because each of the gentlemen who we have on stage are leaders in their industries. They are decision makers who have each had a major impact on the direction and strategy of their organizations. So we'll jump straight into the conversation, and thank you again for being with us. So Christian, I'd like to begin with you first as we look at this intersection between technology, energy resilience, and energy security. What is the common thread as the leader of a large organization in the energy technology space?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for having me. First of all, I think you cannot untangle this. We always have to be aware. At the end, it's about investing into infrastructure and doing this with projects which take time. And at the end, it's obviously thinking early enough about how do I build a sustainable, secure, reliable infrastructure which is able to withstand headwinds, which I do not expect today. So I think you cannot really untangle these different elements, and this is why it's so important that obviously we bring these different things together and say, well, how are we best doing it? And technology, I would always like to underline, technology is in a lot of areas available, right? Let's take technology not as a point to hold us up to implement. There's more technology needed, that's not the question, but we have lots of technology available to deploy. And this is now the long-term alignment, what we need to really get going now, because it really needs to get started in terms of driving a more secure and sustainable energy system.
Alan, would you like to weigh in on this as well? What do you see as the role of technology in shaping energy security and resilience today?
Yeah, well, I agree 100%. And I think that what we see here, though, is the situation we're facing is bigger than any we've ever faced on a global basis, and we are behind. And so the fact that we have to think both short-term and long-term for sure, but we've got to get going. The good news about that is that, in my opinion, it's going to change the way that we deploy the new technologies that will allow us to have sustainable, power, energy, and also, have reliability. And the new technologies are the driver of that. The important part of that is that in the past, new technologies like wind and solar were basically deployed through wealthy governments, providing incentives to have the cost curves come down. And once it got to be competitive in price, it could be deployed in other countries and by corporations. Now it's going to be different, in my opinion. Everybody realizes we have to move faster. And so we can all move at once, that new technologies, if you get the regulation and deployment in the wealthy parts of the world, then they can jump to the emerging markets, and corporations are going to really lean in and invest very heavily in the deployment of these because they know we need to have them for the future. And so I think this time around, if we bring business and governments and regulators and NGOs together, we can move a lot more aggressively than we have in the past.
Jeff, you have an interesting take on this as well as a builder of future cities.
Yeah, I think, first off, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it. I think if I have a position on this panel, it's probably a little bit more about the demand side of the equation. Working a lot with citizens, with people in cities and neighborhoods that need to adopt some of this technology ultimately. And I think that we need to do a better job, all of us, about more clearly articulating the promise of this green transition. So yes, it's about carbon and smart power grids and charging stations, but we need to clearly articulate more about the healthy living, the happier and more connected citizens, and be sure that we're joining those things up really, really authentically. So part of it is a little bit of a mind shift about not only our narrative, but our ambitions, and how really smart people leading businesses are thinking about how those ambitions for everyday quality of life can come to the fore. And the other thing, we can also look at planning a bit from previous examples of how public and private entities come together. So some of you might know about transit-oriented development. It's been around for decades. It's a really smart way to get public sector investment in things like rail and transit stations together with real estate investment, right? So typically regulation allows developers to build taller, more dense around transit lines, and the investment in that real estate then helps pay for the infrastructure. And I think it would be interesting, be curious what you all think also about maybe developing energy-oriented development, right? Can we be smarter about urban planning and architecture where our green energy is going to be produced? Can we think more about how maybe subsidies between the investment in the actual land? First off, we can think a little bit wiser about where are we going to put things like wind, solar, nuclear production facilities. Can we think wiser about that potential revenue helping to subsidize healthier cities and giving access to essentially higher quality of life for people? So there's maybe some well-tested models like transit-oriented development that we can learn from and change and tweak and think about something like energy-oriented development or something along those lines could be a nice way to very tangibly connect public and private with citizens' interests in mind.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And for the capital allocators who are on the panel, the other interesting question as well is how are we going to pay for it and how much is it going to cost, which is a pretty critical challenge when it comes to addressing these issues. But here, I also wanted to hear from you. You have a unique perspective on this as not just the former Chief Investment Officer of the Japanese Government Pension Board, but also as a board member of Tesla. So give me your take on this. How do you see this intersection between energy security and energy resilience, and what trends are you seeing in mobility in particular, given your role at Tesla, which is arguably one of the most important companies in the world in this space today?
Thank you. It's good to be here. Well, you gave me a very big question, but let me put my perspective as the sort of professional managing a big capital. I think one of the big agenda for the investor for the last 10 years is how to put the money behind the necessary change or necessary innovation. So all the energy transition and etc., we know it's necessary, and that each government has their plan to how to introduce it. But we always have an issue that whether the private capital is following or even accelerating that shift. And then that has not been really available or not in place yet. And then the most common kind of excuse for no investment from the investor community is there's no data, there's no transparency of the project. So on one hand, the UN has been pushing. I was a former special envoy on the UN to promote sustainable investment, where we push very hard for the global disclosure, financial disclosure standard makers to come up with the sustainability disclosure standard to basically take out the excuses and also give the financial professional as the kind of like a basis for them to make a judgment. That's one thing which is that we need to push it, but with only that kind of like the approach, very conventional approach, collecting data and then to put the money behind it, it's not going to be quick enough and not significant enough to promote this urgent shift of the sustainable energy. So that's one thing we still need to work out. And from the perspective like a Tesla, you're going to hear directly from the horse's mouth. I think that Elon is going to be speaking over the net, over the internet connection to you on Wednesday. But we are the company who has a mission to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. And we have been believing one of the important approaches is replace the internal combustion engine with the electric vehicle. And then that's gradually happening, and we are, inviting all the other competitors to build more EVs. But one thing I just want to throw into this discussion is, each time, maybe just the Siemens the project as well, but on one hand, the government is trying to push private sector to build a more sustainable infrastructure. But we cannot afford to spend like 2 years to get approval from each government. So that's happening in the electric vehicle regulation too. So I think that we really need to have the government to really work at a much faster pace to incorporate the new technologies. And then the last thing I just want to put is, without the government intervention of strong leadership, not only consumer, but also the investor tend to make a decision based on today's market price or today's available information. So any the government intervention or clear indication where the whole industry or whole society is going will let the consumer make decision on the long-term based trade-offs. So not making a decision on today's oil price over, against today's electricity bill. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of things that the government should be doing better.
As we prepare to hear from Elon later on in the week, I just wanted to get your take on what's happening over at Tesla. Obviously, a business that's faced significant challenges in its scale-up, particularly when it comes to production, intensifying competition, not to mention other issues like regulation, for example, in the markets that you sell into and operate in. Critics would also say that Elon, in a way, is also facing an additional pressure because he's stretched. People say that he's distracted. How do you react to that? How do you respond to that? And how is he doing?
It's really a question whether he's a human or alien, but he seems to have an incredible bandwidth of his work, so I just don't want to comment. I mean, you can ask him directly. But one of the things I just wanted to mention is Tesla has been pushing the regulator very, very hard, and then we got a lot of pushback. And some of our approach has not been very conventional, so we create a lot of debate and controversy. But I think it's also reflect that the urge we are feeling. So we don't care about the competition really, because we are basically competing against the internal combustion engines. So we just need to, we have another 80+% of the global car sales are still not EV. So we are kind of competing against them. So we welcome all the competitors to come in to introduce better cars. And I disagree whenever Elon says, I don't mind the Tesla getting, getting into bankruptcy if somebody else come up with a better car, which I disagree. But I think that's the kind of his philosophy and Tesla's philosophy. We really wanted to shift the whole system or the transportation to sustainable, the energy system.
So as a board, you don't think he's too stretched?
I'm not going to comment on that.
It was worth a try. I did my best. Let's focus the conversation back over to this relationship between public and private when it comes to funding the energy transition, building energy security and resilience. Christian, what's your view on how governments are working now with the private sector? What more would you like to see from governments in order to enable your business, and where are the gaps?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to pick up a couple of points, because Tesla is an interesting example because it disrupted an industry and all the established players weren't able to do that. However, I think if you now transfer that to energy, we will see one fundamental difference. The product life cycles or the project life cycles in energy are extremely long, right? If we sell an offshore wind park today, it's going to be built in 27 or 28. If we build a high voltage power, or if it's supposed to build a high voltage power line which then transport the electricity, it takes us 7 to 10 years. So what you don't have in this industry is this kind of fail fast and disrupt the industry, because until your revenues come, it takes you 7 to 10 years. Who's going to take that bet really to drive the industry forward? So it will be very difficult to find this Tesla example to speed up the industry, and we need speed up. And this is why I think you need this public-private partnership in a different way, which is really saying, yes, we want to do it. Yes, we want to rebuild an infrastructure. And we know it's an enormous investment program, the biggest since industrialization. And that is something which comes probably with challenging fundamental beliefs which we all had. Private money is available. That's not the problem, right? Enormous amount of money is available, but making a plannable business model around it and also the paybacks early enough will be the challenge, because a lot of the infrastructure what we're going to build only going to be operational 6, 7, 8 or 10 years down the road. So how do we crack this nut? And probably there we need some more push from governments. And the other thing is, I think you indicated also, we need a bureaucracy reduction act everywhere, in every country, tremendously, because if it takes 3 years to get a project approved or 5 years to get a project approved, it will not work. It will take too long and money will not flow.
Alan, can you speak to that as well? And also, where do you see the money flowing? What are some of the investment trends that you're watching right now?
Well, we happen to agree on everything. And so I think we need to create a more, if not totally global, we need to create more of a global public-private partnership, because for a variety of reasons. If there's going to be an investment on the scale of what's being talked about, for a company like Siemens to say, okay, let us invest over a 7 to 10 year horizon, if governments would get together and put in regulations that said, if you meet these standards, it can be deployed in our countries, in our regions, then you know you don't have to go through each country and find out if there's going to be a scalable market if you go and invest in it. And that's super important. The other side of the equation is there's actually so much more capital that wants to come into this market in a variety of ways, not only to produce the new things, but to provide the capital to the places that need it through credits. And the issue is there's billions of dollars on the sideline that wants to invest in carbon credits. The problem is there's no accepted market as to what a carbon credit really is. So if we could create a global standard of these are what carbon credits are, you would find there would be billions of dollars, and that money could go to whatever municipalities or whatever regions want to provide investments. So it can go into, look, our friends at the World Bank just put out a report that I've been working with them on about the underinvestment in the emerging markets. So there needs to be more investment. If you can get credits for doing things the right way, those credits could get this deployed a lot faster. And companies want to do it because they want to see it come down the cost curve, because they know they're going to have to be there 5 years and 10 years from now. So putting these things together, and then on the investment side, their investors want to invest behind these ESG things, but then if they see a business model that is sustainable. And one last thing I'll say. We know we need to invest in all of the new clean, the nuclear, the hydrogen, all these things we need to invest in. But let's be clear, we're talking about sustainability, but also reliability, right? We need to have energy, and with the demand for power and energy, we have to make it clear that we have to increase our production of fossil fuels and natural gas on a very significant basis. And the part of that, one, we have to do it for security, and two, there are a number of technologies available today, like direct air capture and others, that can decarbonize the fuels that we go find if we want to burn them, so that we can, create both sustainability but also stability. And if we can just get together and do it, it will also create a lot of jobs and some growth that we need in the global economy.
Alan, just to follow up on that, I'm curious, as someone of your experience who has really built a career and a lifetime on Wall Street, do you think that ESG investing in particular has become too politicized?
Well, I'm going to try and think about a subject that hasn't become too politicized. And so it clearly has, but a lot of it is because it is not, it's the way it's said. ESG investing is not about we're going to invest in these things because we think it's the nice thing to do. The clear point of it is we want to invest in ESG because we know that long term, if we cannot have these things delivered by these companies, consumers aren't going to want to buy their products and everything else, and they'll be taxed and all these reasons. So ESG investment is really about investing Larry Fink said it the other time. He said he thinks the next 100 unicorns are going to be basically, you know, companies that go to $1 billion are going to be companies that are bringing the new technologies to fight climate. So ESG is just part of this. It is the right thing to do, but it's also the profitable thing to do.
Jeff, I want your take on how this will ultimately impact the human experience at the end of the day, because this is something that you specialize in. And when you look at your own design philosophy, I know you were mentioning before that one of the things that guides you and drives you is making public life an intentional driver for design, policy, and governance. So that is putting humans at the forefront. Why is that important?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, it is really important to just think a little bit about the human animal in all this and bring some reality here, right? So in general,
Nice.
I'd like to say very, very lovingly that humans are generally like very busy and pretty lazy. Or energy efficient, whatever you want to call it besides lazy, right? And I think there's a real truth in what you were saying there, Alan, at the end, just about I think those that are fighting for sustainability, interested in climate, there's been a discussion about basically trying to fight against human nature, telling all these folks consume less, do less, and which is really, it's one thing in wealthy countries, but it's even more unfair in unwealthy countries, right? To say low-income folks, hey, no, you don't get more energy because it's dirty, or you don't get more opportunity because it uses more carbon. And I think we have to really change the dialogue. And how I interpreted what you were saying is that we have to be honest. We're going to use more energy. We're going to have more people on the planet using more stuff, and that's good. Then if we're honest, then we're making sure that people are using more green energy or more clean energy and have better access to this opportunity. But there's a counter argument that I see in a lot of, you know, sort of my creative circles, you know, maybe outside of finance, that are just constantly talking about, you know, conserve, 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 and I just don't think it's fair, and it's not doing justice to like the real human experience, which is going to want more things. So I'm interested in a shift that maybe we can agree across public and private towards abundance rather than scarcity, but then using technology and using the right sort of language and ambition around human experience to get us there.
Hiro, you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. And can I just touch upon the ESG being politicized?
Please.
I have been advocating ESG for the last 7 years, and then the one way I think people should look at ESG or sustainable investment is, if you look at all the different agenda in ESG, or you can use SDGs alternatively too, if you agree any of those, the agenda, we fail to deliver, what kind of risk we are going to, you know, face. So ESG is the kind of like a collective approach of the investment community to minimize the risk which goes beyond the typical investment horizon. Otherwise, this is what the Mark Carney called the tragedy of a horizon. Every investor analyze their risk return over the next 3 years, you know, maybe 2 months, 3 months, 3 years, 5 years, and they continue to roll until they reach the cliff. So I think the ESG, that we should look at that as a way for our society and our economy to avoid the risk, which we know it's waiting for us in the future, and to integrate that into today's investment decision.
So we're rapidly running out of time. I'll give our panel some time to have some final thoughts now as well. And Christian, I'll start with you. Just some parting words on World Government Summit, but also the key success factors for a sustainable transition. What will it mean for the business? What's your immediate focus from this point on?
No, these type of summits and these type of discussions, always we have to be aware we are privileged, and we are privileged to be part of these summits, part of these panels, and we are the ones who have to drive it. There's options to take, right? We can influence things. We can do a lot of stuff, but we have to do it. And this would always be my pledge in these rounds. There's nobody else, right? I mean, if we don't get it together, if we don't drive, either coming from the government or coming from the corporate side, then nobody else is there. We are the most privileged people on the planet who can drive it forward, so we better get started.
Alan.
Well, actually, a point I'd like to make on top of all these things is I think it's incredibly great that we're having this conference in the UAE, because I think the UAE has been a leader in a lot of things on technology for the region, and on this subject here, you know, a community that has all this fossil fuel and is looking to the future is taking a leadership position in how we're going to create this transition, because I think they really understand it. And I think it's been great. And I will make one prediction. I honestly believe that when you look at where are there young populations, where is there arable land, where is there places you can put a lot of this new investment, I honestly believe that the UAE is going to turn out to be the hub of where a lot of the things we're talking about happens. And I just want to really thank them for hosting this summit, because I think it's very important.
Quickly building on that, not only the UAE part, which I wanted to also really gush about, but since you got the applause, I don't want to leave it at that. But I do believe that not only in the UAE, but a lot of places where populations are young, I just want to emphasize, I've got a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. This generation alpha, we have to be thinking much, much more about their needs, and they're already pretty far ahead of the curve here, but if we can really have them in the forefront, that's going to be important.
Hero, finally.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I grew up in finance, and I'm a genuine believer of free market and a market efficiency. But the problem with the market, the perception of market being right is it's right in the end. And the problem with the problem we are facing right now, we have no time to waste. So we need to make sure that the market wouldn't waste their time trying to figure out what's the right direction. That's where we expect the government to intervene. And then we really need the efficient government, because the bureaucracy itself, we cannot afford it. So I think the leadership that's shown by the UAE by gathering these people, and you are showing a lot of the government level leadership and efficiency will, they put as the sort of like a role model, because we really need efficient government and policy on the top of policy making.
Well, gentlemen, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you again for sharing your time with us. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon as well, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the World Government Summit. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next session is titled Building a Brain for Any Age with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, Chief Medical Correspondent from CNN.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here. Thank you very much to everyone here at the Government Summit. I've been looking forward to this in part because I felt that a discussion about the future of health should also include a discussion about the future health of our brains. We talk a lot about the health of our bodies, but not as much about our brains. And I think for a lot of people, there's this belief that the brain is something that's not capable of really being optimized or maintained. I've been a neurosurgeon for some 25 years now, and I think a lot of people think about the brain sort of as a black box. You measure a black box by its inputs and its outputs, but you don't really get to see the inner workings of the brain. And I think that's why people have thought for a long time that it's immutable. It's incapable of being changed in some way. The brain is static and it's fixed. And one of the things I really wanted to convey to all of you today is that that's not the case. Perhaps more than any other organ in the body, the brain can not only stay healthy throughout your entire life, but also continue to improve. And I know that that sounds audacious to a lot of people, but I've worked with scientists all over the world. I've traveled to places where people are cognitively strong into their 90s, even over 100 years old, and I've seen this in the operating room as well. I think part of the problem is for a lot of people, the way that we think about aging overall has been a big challenge. We have this preordained notion of it. In the United States, we spend $4 trillion a year on healthcare, and aging is still a really frightening process for people. No one desires growing old, And I don't think it's just because it's a reminder of our mortality, but I think in part it's because we envision that we're going to get slower, that we're going to be more predisposed to injuries, that we're going to end up in hospitals and long-term care facilities. Now, to be fair, we all age. That is true. There's no question about it. Even as you're sitting here listening to me, you age a little bit. The lens, for example, in the front of your eyes, those lenses are the most durable, remarkable lenses probably ever designed on the planet. But you get into your 4th decade of life and that lens starts to lose its elasticity and you find yourself pushing the paper further and further away to read, for example. The amount of light that gets through your lens, if you're close to 60 years old, is about 1/3 of what it was when you were 20 years old. It becomes harder to see in the dark. If you're closer to 50, about half your hair has probably turned gray. You simply run out of the pigment that gives your hair its color. And if you were to reach in and feel your aorta, which is the large blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart, it should feel soft and elastic. But as you age, it starts to get crunchier and more brittle, which is why by the time we retire, most of us have some degree of hypertension. Deep within your skin cells, skin's the largest organ in the body, and there's these waste mechanisms that are always being cleared, unless you're aging, in which case those waste mechanisms start to fail a bit. And you don't feel any different, but people, your friends and your family may notice that you have a little bit of loss of vibrancy in your skin. And eventually those waste products start to accumulate as age spots. Now, if you consider all that and you ask the average person how long they want to live, they will probably give you some version of the answer that it depends. What kind of shape am I going to be in? Are the people that I love still going to be around? So maybe a better question that was recently asked is, when does old age begin? And it's really interesting when they look at these surveys. The answer there as well seems to be, it depends on how old the person is that is being asked the question. If you are over the age of 65, people think old age begins around 75. People over the age of 75 probably say even older. People under 30 think old age begins around age 60. I happen to have 3 teenage daughters, 17, 15, and 13, and I asked them when I was preparing for this talk, when do they think old age begins? And they said, how old are you? I said 53, and they said, yeah, that sounds about right. 68 on average was when people said old age really began. But the reason I bring this up, because in all seriousness, when we think about aging, I think it's really important to understand that it's not preordained that your brain is going to age like the rest of your body. It's not at all guaranteed that you're going to lose your edge, that you're going to lose your ability to think clearly, your cognition overall, or your memory. That is considered outdated thinking. And I just think this is really remarkable because over the last quarter century, we learned something that was pretty revelatory in the world of neuroscience. We learned that you could continue to grow new brain cells at any age. The conventional wisdom, even what I learned when I was studying neuroscience a quarter century ago, was you got a certain number of neurons, and that was basically what you got. You drained the cash over the years of your life. But that's not the case. We believe that in part because the only time we really inspected the black box was when there was a problem, when there was a tumor or trauma. We did not get to see the brain in sort of its healthy state. We did not get to understand how the brain behaved most of the time. As our imaging grew more sophisticated, we started to see what the healthy brain really does look like, and it's stunning. Inside your skulls right now, your brain is pulsing. It's robust, it's changing, and it's growing. And there's now a way that we realize and appreciate that within our skulls is an entire universe. There are more neurons in your brain than there are stars in the sky. And on top of that, we realize the brain can reliably grow sharper, develop more connections between those neurons, function more efficiently as it gets older, not despite it getting older. It has had longer to learn. It is the ultimate example of machine learning, which is part of the reason I've dedicated my life to it. People often ask, like, how do you define a healthy brain? We know how to define the health of lots of organs, you know, the heart, the liver, your kidneys. You can measure things, blood pressure and cholesterol levels, liver function tests, creatinine levels. But what is a healthy brain? What does that really mean? From a neuroscience perspective, it's really interesting to think about the fact that a healthy brain may be most clearly defined by one that has a robust and healthy population of new cells, of new brain cells, and that they are constantly exchanging, constantly being created at any age. So if we know this process called neurogenesis, the idea of growing new brain cells, what does it mean? Well, it has a lot of implications for what are some of the largest and most concerning neurodegenerative diseases that are coming in the world, such as Alzheimer's. But it also raises this question, if that is possible, then how do I do it? How do I create these new brain cells? And I thought I'd spend just a few minutes here giving you a few pearls of wisdom that I gleaned. I spent a lot of time talking to scientists who worked on this research, and I asked them, how do they fundamentally live their lives now differently because of what they've learned? And the way that I sort of broke this down is into the big buckets of how we live our lives, through movement, through nourishment, through rest, through connection, and through discovery. Now, I'll preface by saying, as a general rule, what is good for the heart is good for the brain. That is true. We've had a lot of knowledge over the last several decades about how to improve and maintain our heart health. And there's a lot of things that are crossing over. But there are some important differences as well. And that's what I want to focus on. So let's start with movement. More than anything else, I think movement is the most reliable way to grow new brain cells. The more you move, the more you are sending signals essentially to your entire body that you want to be here, that you want to be healthy. But most remarkably, you're sending a signal for the brain to create a substance known as BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. You don't need to remember that, but think of that as sort of the miracle grow for the brain, as one scientist put it to me. It's this substance that is actually promoting that neurogenesis, telling new brain cells to grow. You cannot ingest it, you cannot eat it, it can only be made by your own body. Now, movement, no surprise, is good for you. Everyone already knows that, but here's one of the big differences, I think, between the brain and the heart. When it comes to the type of movement that is good for the brain, it's probably more moderate movement, brisk movement, not intense. When you're doing that, you're producing a lot of this brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Intense exercise can be good for you, certainly good for your heart health. But the problem is when you're intensely moving, intensely exercising, for example, you're also making a lot of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and that can actually inhibit the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So intense activity may be good for the heart, but if it's the brain health you're looking for, moderate activity is going to be better. I'll focus on a distinction when it comes to nourishment as well. Again, we have a pretty good sense of what comprises a healthy diet, and one of the things that we focus a lot on is sugar. We know that we eat too much sugar. Human beings used to get sugar a couple of times a year, predominantly when fruit fell from the trees. Even honey was protected by the bees. But now, on average, we eat about 100 pounds of sugar a year, and we know that's too much. But what happens is when you're getting a lot of calories through something like sugar, your body's response is to assume that maybe I'll never eat again, or I'm not going to eat for a long time. So it takes all that high-dense energy and basically stores it as fat. But that's not what the brain does, as it turns out. And this was something that was learned about 10 years ago. The brain is very sensitive to glucose. So as your blood glucose starts to really rise, the receptors in the brain, instead of absorbing all that energy, they turn off. They simply stop absorbing any energy. So at the same time you're eating a really, really calorie-dense meal full of a lot of sugar, you could be overstuffing your body and starving your brain at the same time. It's a difference between the brain and the rest of the body. Hydration, critically important for all functions. Hydration is one of the substrates that is necessary for BDNF, but one needs to keep in mind that the brain itself is 85% water. What that means is just 1% dehydration can lead to a 5% decrease in cognitive function. 1%. I mean, I think this is one of the most under-recognized things that we talk about with regard to cognition overall. A 2% decrease in hydration can result in acute short-term memory loss, objective problems with mathematical computations, and an inability to store long-term memories. Just 2%. So sugar and water, so critical when it comes to brain health for those reasons. Sleep or rest, again, we know is important, but for the brain, sleep is not a period of inactivity. In fact, it's one of the most metabolically active times for the brain. And we know that your brain is constantly creating waste products, and those waste products are constantly being cleared, but it is during sleep when that waste clearance is most efficient. So sleep is really important for clearing away some of the substrates that may be the precursors to things like amyloid plaque, which is associated with Alzheimer's disease. We also know that sleep is when you actually take your short-term memories and you actually put them into a long-term memory store. I often tell my friends, if you have these wonderful experiences in life, you need to sleep in order for them to actually become a part of your life story. Social connection, really important. Again, something that we've known for some time, but we're starting to get data and understand why some of these things are important. When you're having deep social connections with people, you tend to make more of a substance known as oxytocin, which is something that can also amplify the impact of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. One of the things I think is so important is just thinking about how we use our brains overall. People often ask me, do we in fact use our entire brains? And the answer is yes, we do use our entire brains. But we probably use about 10% of our brain 90% of the time. It's kind of like living in a single city your whole life. You get to know that city really well. You can drive those roads probably with your eyes closed, but you haven't really traveled outside your city. You really haven't traveled the world very much. Think of your brain sort of the same way. The brain's all there. Maybe you've seen these other places on the planet of your brain, but you haven't really spent time there. That is really the art of discovery when it comes to brain health. If you start to do things that are different in some way, you can imagine yourself actually visiting these different parts of your brain, doing brand new things, or doing familiar things in a brand new way. A lot of times people will do things like crossword puzzles and brain training exercises, and those can be really good, but it's kind of like getting even better at understanding the city in which you already live. You can already drive those roads with your eyes closed. If you want to actually build new brain cells, build more cognitive reserve and resilience, you need to travel within your brain. For me, when I started learning some of this stuff, I started doing things like painting. I'm a terrible artist, but doing something that was totally different, and in this case, I'm right-handed, I started using my left hand. So a brand new hobby with my non-dominant hand is a sort of type of discovery that can help build that cognitive reserve. You could try brushing your teeth tonight with your non-dominant hand, eat dinner tonight with your non-dominant hand. It's amazing what that does to your brain, how quickly you can build that cognitive reserve. But also more practically speaking, if you were to have some sort of problem, a trauma or a neurodegenerative problem, the idea now that you have all this existing cognitive reserve can really improve your chance of recovery. Also, it's this idea that if you have a lot of cognitive reserve, you're not redlining all the time. You're not barely keeping up. You're not crushed by life's daily events, but instead, you're sort of strengthened by it. You're able to use those events and actually strengthen the brain, creating more of that neurogenesis. None of what I described is hard, but it shouldn't necessarily be easy either. When we talk about the brain, we're talking about the most enigmatic 3.5 pounds of tissue anywhere in the known universe. It is this remarkable supercomputer that we have in our skulls with a parallel operating system known as consciousness. There's nothing else like it. But we are learning every day about how best to maintain it. And yes, you can. You can maintain it, you can optimize it, and we know now that it's a beautiful thing to believe that you can build a better brain at any age. I hope that inspires you. Thank you very much.
الحضور الكريم، كانت هذه آخر جلسة رئيسية لهذا اليوم. نشكركم على حضوركم القمة العالمية للحكومات 2023. سيتجدد لقاؤنا معكم غدا عند الساعة 9 صباحا.
Distinguished guests, this was the last plenary session for today. We thank you for your attendance and look forward to welcoming you tomorrow at 9 a.m. for the second day of the World Government Summit 2023.
الصباحية. أكثر اليوم التوجهات اللي راح نلاحظها أن في الهجرة الجماعية، إذا سمعتوا عنها اليوم في هجرة ما يقارب 4 مليارات، لكن هذه الهجرة وين قاعد تصير؟ من العالم الواقعي إلى العالم الافتراضي. يعني اليوم احنا عندنا ماسف تغير كبير جدا. فاليوم أخت فرحة يعني قاعدين نشوف هذه التحولات الكبيرة. كيف اليوم أنا عندي أنظمة الموارد البشرية كيف أقدر أستثمر مثل هذه التقنيات الحديثة؟ كيف أقدر أعكسها على مختلف القطاعات؟ اليوم تكلم سعادة محمد أن اليوم إحنا عندنا الأجيال الجديدة في قطاع التعليم، قطاع الصحة، قطاع الخدمات الحكومية بالذات.
صحيح. هني ندخل في مجال الابتكار، وهالموضوع اللي هو تطرق له جميع الجهات الحكومية بشكل واسع. فموضوع الميتافيرس له طرق كثيرة لحد الحين نعتبرها كمواضيع هجينة لحد الحين في طورة التنمية، بس احنا ممكن نستغلها في موضوع التوظيف، في موضوع تدريب الموظفين، حتى في موضوع أن شلون أنت تعلم الموظف في negotiation skills. تكلم عن سعادة الدكتور في البداية أن مع التكنولوجيا الحديثة في مواضيع كثيرة ممكن نستغلها في التدريب وفي التطوير الموظفين. من خلالها بعد كذلك مش بس تدريب وتطوير الموظفين، نعتبرها كسوفت سكيلز للموظف أنه يرفع من مهاراته الوظيفية.
بما أننا قاعدين نتكلم عن مهارات الموظفين، في تخوف حاصل أن مثل هذه التقنيات اليوم يمكن تستبدل الوظائف. يعني أنا بعد 10 سنوات إذا أنا حاليا أشتغل administration أو في قطاع الإعلام أو في قطاعات عديدة، اليوم في تخوف كبير. هل قاعدين نشوف مثل هذه التقنيات راح تطلع الناس؟ مع أن احنا نعرف اليوم أن مع وجود أي تقنية قد يكون في وظائف جديدة. فحابين نسمع من رأيكم أيضا ومن خبرتكم كيف أنا كحكومة ممكن آخذ خطوات استباقية، ممكن أدمج الموضوع، موضوع الأبسكيلينج والريسكيلينج اللي تفضلتي فيه. فإذا بس ممكن تعطونا مرئياتكم في هذا الموضوع سعادة محمد.
أنا بتكلم عن هذا الموضوع في 3 محاور رئيسية. المحاور هذه أو الأوجه اللي نسميها هي حقيقة تخلق بيئة عمل. فمن المهم ذكر بيئة العمل، ومن مهم نتكلم عن التشريعات واللي ذكرنا في أول الحديث، ونتكلم عن التفاعل الثالث في العملية وهو الموارد البشرية. احنا كله نخدمه في هذا الجانب. إذا أول شيء حطينا في بالنا إنه كل ما نعمله له هدف، فمعناته إنه احنا حنخلق أول شيء بيئة عمل مناسبة لما ذكرنا. سيكون هناك برامج تدريبية، وهذا التدريب المستمر في الجيل الجديد في مسألة التحول للتقنية مطلب أساسي، إنه التدريب مستمر، المراجعة مستمرة، التوازن ما بين الأتمتة والإنساني والتفاعل الإنساني، وأيضا ستخلق رضا وظيفي داخل هذه المؤسسات. أيضا هذا الرضا الوظيفي يأتي نتيجة أنه عن طريق التقنية اللي تكلمنا فيها سابقا، وهي من التعاملات الموجودة في إدارة الموارد البشرية. أيضا هذه الوظائف ستدير الأعمال الرتيبة أو الأعمال الروتينية غالبا، والوظائف البسيطة. فمعناته الوظائف اللي تذهب، اللي أصلا الموظف أصبح عنده ملل منها، فبإمكان الأنظمة الإلكترونية والتقنية والذكاء الاصطناعي تعمل على هذا الجانب. أيضا التدريب عند تقييم الموظفين، في هناك سيكون عوامل إيجابية للقيادات في عملية الإشراف وأيضا متابعة الموظفين وتقييمهم، فيكون هناك عدل أيضا في عدل في وتكافؤ الفرص، ودائما سيكون هناك منظومة تحفز الموظف وتحافظ على الموظفين أو الكفاءات اللي موجودة حاليا في المنشأة أو الوحدة، وأيضا ستكون جاذب للكفاءات الخارجية فخارج الوحدة. من هذا كله يأتي المصطلح أنه بيئة العمل هي شيء أساسي في عملية تحقيق التوازن.
صحيح.
بس كلمة أخيرة أنا بأضيفها على سعادة المستشار، أن إحنا من هدفنا كموارد بشرية تطوير الموظفين ومواكبتهم مع التطورات اللي حاصلة. فأكيد الوظائف اللي راح تقريبا تكون تختفي مستقبليا، احنا نقدر كموارد بشريه نطور موظفينا ونخليهم يواكبون العصر ويكونون متزامنين مع التطور اللي حاصل.
جميل. انا ما اعرف اذا عندنا وقت، اعتقد انتهينا. كنا نبغى نفتح المجال الصراحه لاسئله. خلاص مشكورين، وطبعا شكرا لضيوفنا الكرام سعادة محمد وأيضا سعادة فرحة، ومشكورين طبعا أسعدتونا بتواجدكم. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا لك.
نشكر سعادة فرحة الكواري وسعادة محمد غالب الهناي على هذا الطرح الثري والأفكار النيرة حول بيئة عمل المستقبل والجيل الجديد لأنظمة الموارد البشرية، وطبعا هم ضيوفنا وعلينا وعراسنا موجودين خلال القمة، ويمكنكم سؤالهم بأي سؤال حول المواضيع اللي طرحوها من خلال هذه الجلسة. خليجنا زاخر بالتجارب الحية، وهذه التجارب تؤكد لنا اليوم بأننا على نهج مستقبلي ريادي لمنطقة الخليج بإذن الله. أما الآن إلى استعراض ممارسات خليجية أخرى متميزة في مجال الموارد البشرية، وندعو سعادة الدكتور رائد بن شمس مدير عام معهد الإدارة العامة لمملكة البحرين ليشاركنا التجربة البحرينية المتمثلة في برنامج هايبو. فليتفضل مشكورا.
شكرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. طبعا الصورة اللي كانت هنا ترى مو أنا، هذه واحد، هاي الأفاتار، هاي الميتافيرس. شكرا جزيلا أخي الكريم، يحفظك الله. وحاط لنا تركية اليوم، ما بعرفين شو صار، إن شاء الله نعرف نتحكم مع التركية. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تجربة المعهد في برنامج هيبو يوث. هيبو يوث، خليني بس أرجع شوي، أنا يمكن ما ألتزم كثير بالسلايدات، بعطيكم شوية من خلفية الموضوع. كانت عندنا إشكالية وما زالت الإشكالية أظن نواجهها كلنا في الخليج، وهي أن العمل الحكومي قاعد يتطور، لكن المجتمع ما زال يطالب أكثر. فكل ما أعطيت، كل ما قال لك لا عطنا أكثر، كل ما تعطي كل ما تسوي. توني كنت أكلم أختي تقول نعم، كل ما نعطي كل ما يكون في ما زال في مطالب أكثر، من المطالب الأكثر ممكن تؤدي إلى بعض الأحيان إلى التذمر. فجيبنا عشان نفكر في الموضوع، هذه مثل ما نقول مسويناها خارج الاكسترا كوريكولا، مش جزء من عمل المعهد مباشرة، وإنما مع الفريق مع المجتمع. فجبت مجموعة من الشباب ما نليناهم طبعا، أنا اللي معاهم فلازم الشباب معاي يعني. فجبنا مجموعة من الشباب، قلنا حق الشباب يا شباب الآن كيف ممكن نغير النظرة السلبية إلى نظرة إيجابية عن العمل الحكومي اللي قاعد يتطور. فبدينا الرحلة فيما يسمى بالبروبلم دريفن PDIA اللي هو Problem Driven Iterative Adaptation، آلية في المشاريع غير الواضحة، مش المشروع نبدي من البداية إلى النهاية، لأن هذه المشاريع ما لها أول ونهاية. فدخلنا في مقترحات ل6 مشاريع، حقيقة 4 منهم ماتوا، واللي جبناهم من الأشخاص تغيروا، وجبنا من فريق ثاني وجبنا من فريق ثالث. مشروعين من هذه المشاريع كان هذه واحد منهم. هذه المشروع كيف نخلي الشباب يكون لهم واقع أكبر في عملنا الحكومي، وليس فقط العمل الحكومي كونه أنه هو يقدم الخدمة، لأن اللي يقدمون الخدمة الآن موجودين، وليس الهدف منه توظيفهم في العمل الحكومي، لكن كيف ممكن يكونون. هاي الفرق اللي احنا نقول ممكن نسمع من الموظفين من المواطنين، لكن مهم ان احنا نحول المواطن معانا كشريك فاعل يعمل في التطوير والتغيير المستمر اللي قاعد يصير. فالغرض الاستراتيجي حقيقة هو شباب بحريني بكل معنى الكلمة يستطيع أن يتنافس، لكنه يحقق إنجازات محلية ودولية، وأهمها أنه يكون جزء من منظومة العمل معانا. حددنا مجموعة من القدرات اللي نحتاج أن احنا نطورها معاهم، سواء كانت القيادة، القيم، وهني القيم عادة ننساها دائما، القيم جزء ماشي حالك، عندنا القيم صح ولا لا، لكن القيم إذا ما تحولت إلى سلوك بتظل هلامية وبتظل ليس لها موقع من الإعراب، مثل ما نقول ما لها لا طعم ولا ريحة ولا لون، ما تأثر. وهني أكدنا أن القيم الوطنية لابد أنها تتحول إلى سلوك عشان نقدر بالفعل يكون لها واقع، بالإضافة إلى مجموعة من الأمور الأخرى سواء كانت في التحليل أو التفكير وغيره. وهني مرة ثانية أأكد أن القيادة ليست بالمستوى الوظيفي، لأن هذين شباب ما لهم أصلا وظيفة معينة، فإحنا نبي نتعرف معاهم على رحلة معينة نمشي معاهم، لأنهم لسه ظاهرين من المدرسة أو توهم خلصين الجامعة، فهم ما لهم موقع من الإعراب في كوظيفة معينة محددة. يمكن نقطة رئيسية في هذه السلايد هي نقطة القدوات القيادية. شبابنا اليوم ينقصهم نقص كبير جدا في تعرفهم على القدوات اللي موجودة عندهم في المجتمع. نسمع كثير عن بيل جيتس، مش عارف من، ما في داعي أذكر أسامي كثيرة، لكن يعني معقولة في بلادنا ما عندنا قدوات اللي بالإمكان شبابنا وعيالنا يرتبطون فيهم ويشوفون بالفعل أن نقدر نغير ونطور من واقعنا، من قيمنا، من ثقافتنا؟ موجودين. الصعوبة وين؟ الصعوبة أن احنا ندورهم ونستفيد منهم، يا هم يستفيدون وإحنا نستفيد. فلذلك صار عندنا ما يسمى بالهيبو، اللي هو هاي بوتنشال، هيبو يوث أو هاي بوتنشال يوث. مشينا في 4 دفعات، سوينا دراسات وطنية معاهم، الشباب قاموا بدراسات وطنية، راح نستعرض معاكم مجموعة منهم. 25 مشروع، لأنه we are working on project based، من ضمنهم مشروع تخرجوا منه مجموعة من الشباب واليوم منهم وزراء، مبني على هذا البرنامج. برنامج ثاني صار مبني على هذا البرنامج. أحد أساليب الرئيسية في هذا المجال هو التشبيك. طبعا في أمور كثيرة ما راح أدخل فيها واحد، لكن التشبيك عند الشباب مختلف عن التشبيك مثل ما قلت قبل شوي عند الأجيال السابقة، ما بنسميهم شياب، بنعدل شوي. عند الأجيال السابقة طيب التشبيك جزء رئيسي من حياتنا اليومية. إذا أنت ما يعرفونك الناس بتقول لي أنا والله عندي شهادة، أنا عندي مهارات، عندي قدرات، وما حد يعرفك، شلون؟ هو ماجيك يعني سحر؟ هو مو سحر. طيب شلون نخلي ربعنا وعيالنا وشبابنا يعرفون الناس، وإذا هو ما يقدر يعرف عن نفسه مشكلة. طبعا بالإضافة إلى أهم الأمور اللي موجودة فيها أن هذه project based learning، مو تعال تعلم مهارات معينة وعقب ما تظهر ب5 دقائق نسيت كل السالفة. إذا ما حطوا يدهم في الماء الحار وجربوا ما راح يتذكرون. فمهم بالنسبة لنا أن يدخلون في مشاريع محددة. لذلك عملنا على شراكات مع القطاع الخاص، مع القطاع العام، تحركنا مع كثير من المؤسسات، لكن الأجمل أن التصميم لهذا البرنامج تصميم من الشباب البحريني للشباب البحريني. شفنا الانترناشونال بنش ماركس، لكن اللي صمموه بحرينيين واللي اشتغلوا عليه بحرينيين. واللي أجمل أن القيادات، صنعنا مجموعة من القيادات، صنعنا وهني أعنيها لأن بدينا إحنا نبحث عن قيادات في داخل المجتمع، وبدينا نستعرضهم مع الشباب اللي موجودين في هيبو، فيشوفونهم كقيادات يتحفزون والاثنين يستفيدون مع بعض. فالجميل كذلك أن انتقلنا منهم اللي بدوا هم نفسهم يديرون البرنامج معانا. هذا المشروع، هذا البرنامج بالمناسبة زيرو كوست، بديناه تطوعا وما زال تطوعا من غير أي تكلفة مادية. عشان نقدر نختارهم good in good out يقول لك صح؟ دائما نستخدم البوزيتيف ثينكينج صح؟ good in good out. من أحد الأمور الرئيسية هي مسألة المقابلات. ما شاء الله يتقدموا كثيرين، شفتوا الأرقام السابقة. لكن نختار الأشخاص على أي أساس المقابلات كانت موجودة؟ على أساس بسيط جدا. ليس ما يمكن أنك تأخذه من هذا البرنامج. اللي يعطينا يقول لنا أنت شنو، يقول لي أنا راح أستفيد من هذا البرنامج 1 2 3 4، نقول له شكرا جزيلا مع السلامة. طيب ايش تبي منهم يا رائد؟ المطلوب منهم كل واحد ماذا راح يقدم هو للبلد. طيب هو لسه توه شباب، لحين ما بدأ طريقه. نعم، إذا ما يبدي الواحد يفكر في هذا العمر في العطاء ما راح يفكر في عقبه، خلاص تعود. فمن البداية من أحد أهم الكرايتيريا هي ماذا راح تقدم أنت للبلد. بتاخذ لك وظيفة هذه لك أنت، بتاخذ لك علم هذه لك أنت، بتترقى هذه لك أنت. لكن إذا أنت ما تفكر شنو ممكن تخدم، نقول له شكرا جزيلا، في ناس غيرك مستعدين أنهم يقدمون. وتحركنا على شركاء، وهذين اللي ساعدونا في هذا المجال. وزارة شؤون الشباب، إنجاز البحرين مثال على ذلك، مؤسسة غير ربحية. لما تكلمنا مع شركات ومؤسسات حكومية للدعم، دعمهم كان معنوي وليس الدعم المادي، ممكن يعني من خلال الكوتشز، من خلال المنتورز اللي يجون معانا ويشتغلون معانا في هاي الأساس. من الإنجازات دراسات وطنية مباشرة ظهرت فيها أوامر ملكية مباشرة على النتائج أو التوصيات من هذه الدراسات. مثال على ذلك، الدراسة الأولى كانت عن ما يسمى بمرتكزات الشبابية، شنو حاجات الشباب الحقيقية. نتكلم يمكن عن تفاصيل بس من المرة الثانية. أهم الأمور كانت سيد ماني حق البروجكت مالت الشباب، مبالغ بسيطة ممكن أن الشباب يستخدمونها عشان يبنون مشاريعهم، أفكارهم الإبداعية ابتكارية يجربون. لأن كلنا جربنا وطحنا. يمكن بهاتنا عطانا مجال، العمر مالنا فترتنا كانت عطتنا مجال ان احنا نجرب. الشباب اليوم يمكن ما يكون عندهم هذه القدرة، ما يكون عندهم هذه المبالغ. فبالنسبة للشباب كانوا يحتاجون هذه المبالغ. صدر على هذا الأمر مباشرة أمر ملكي بصناعة أو خلق صندوق الأمل، اللي على أساسه ما شاء الله تبارك الله اليوم مشاريع دخلت من الشباب وبدأت تتطور وترتقي. المشروع الثاني كان أحد التوصيات الرئيسية أنه يكون في يوم الشباب البحريني، واللي على أساسه صار يوم الشباب الخليجي. مجموعة من القيادات الحكومية، طبعا هذه مش أنا، مجموعة من القيادات الحكومية قابلوهم، لكن في مجموعة من الشباب كذلك اللي ما لهم كثير من الصيت في داخل المجتمع بدأوا يظهرون. ربنا لك الحمد. هذه دراسة من الدراسات. هاي دراستين الثانيين، دراسة مرتكزات العمل الشبابي ودراسة المواهب البحرينية. مرتكزات العمل الشبابي دراسة ميدانية سووها الشباب، وأبشركم هذه كانت الدفعة الأولى، والدفعة الأولى خلقت ترند على تويتر هم بنفسهم. يعني حققنا الهدف الأساسي اللي بديناه، أن كيف ممكن نخلق الصورة الإيجابية عن العمل الحكومي. فوق 7000 استجابة، مجموعة من المخرجات. نفس الشيء دراسة المواهب البحرينية. وفي دراسة المواهب البحرينية بالمناسبة ظهرنا موديل للبحرين، وأن المواهب نحتاج أن احنا نصقلها، لا، نحتاج نستكشفها. واكتشاف المواهب مش في المدرسة. إذا وصلنا إلى المدرسة وصلنا إلى مرحلة متأخرة خلاص. اكتشاف المواهب لابد أنها تكون في المنزل، وحددنا على أساسه الفئات العمرية. وما شاء الله تبارك الله الآن في مشروع كبير جدا لاكتشاف صقل المواهب واستثمارها في المستقبل. لذلك السؤال اللي يطرح نفسه، إذا أنا راح نريد نكتشف المواهب في البيت، شلون راح أوصل حق الأب والأم؟ شلون راح أوصل حق العائلة داخل البيت؟ احنا مؤسسة حكومية، مؤسسة ندرب القطاع العام، معنى ذلك لابد أن يكون دورنا خارج فقط المنظومة البسيطة اللي أنا عندي الكنترول فيها. طيب كيف راح أعملها؟ من خلال الشباب لما هم يوصلون إلى المجتمع بشكل أكبر. فصارت مجموعة من دراسات قياس الأثر، هذه يمكن النتائج على أساسه، وعلى أساسه صارت الدراسة الأولية اللي بدينا فيها. كنا نقول يمكن هذه شوية فيها أرقام جميلة، نبي نعرف إيش الإشكالية الأساسية عندنا، وعلى أساسه لو تلاحظون الأرقام، وهذه الأرقام اللي خلت القيادة تنتبه مباشرة. هذه دراسات سووها الشباب. فلما السؤال مش مثال على ذلك، 60% من الشباب على غير دراية بإجراءات وآليات الدعم المقدمة لهم. 90% غير مقتنعين بدور القطاع العام. شغل موجود لكن مش مقتنعين فيه. ليش؟ لأن عندهم اهتمامات مختلفة. لذلك لما جينا وسوينا مرتكزات الشباب، مرتكزات 6 وسطها الرئيسي هو الأمل. وهذا يمكن أختم فيه. الشباب اليوم والشباب في المستقبل مع كل التغييرات اللي قاعدة تصير يبون يشوفون أن في مستقبل، يبون يحسون ويعيشون أن ترى مستقبلنا ممكن يكون طيب. كل قاعد يتكلم في الأخبار في الإشكاليات أن ورانا مشاكل، ورانا مصايب، صح 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 صح، لكن الخير موجود. لذلك مرتكز رئيسي بالنسبة لنا هو الأمل، وكيف نصنع من خلال الأمل بقية التفاصيل، وكيف نبني الشباب. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا لسعادة الدكتور رائد بن شمس على عرض واحدة من تجارب حكومة البحرين رائدة في مجال تعزيز مهارات الشباب في العمل الحكومي، وفعلا أعطيت الشباب أمل. أتمنى لك إن شاء الله كل التوفيق والنجاح. أعتقد أنت في مرتبة بروفيسور الآن مو دكتوراه. الله يوفقك يا دكتور. الآن ننتقل لتجربة حكومة الإمارات الممثلة في مبادرة جاهز لمستقبل المواهب الحكومية. ندعو استعراض هذه التجربة السيدة مريم الزرعوني، مدير إدارة تخطيط الموارد البشرية في الهيئة الاتحادية للموارد البشرية الحكومية بدولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة. فلتتفضل مشكورة.
السلام عليكم. إن شاء الله نعرف أنكم تعبتوا، إن شاء الله بيكون العرض خفيف ولطيف عليكم إن شاء الله. أوكي، مبادرة جاهز هي من المبادرات اللي اطلقتها حكومة دولة الإمارات على مستوى الحكومة الاتحادية. تعتبر من أهم المشاريع التحولية الكبرى اللي تم إطلاقها على مستوى الحكومة الاتحادية، وتعتبر مبادرة جاهز لدعم الجاهزية الحكومة لمستقبل مهارات المستقبل. طبعاً مثل ما تعرفون العالم يشهد تغييرات، وهذه التغييرات متسارعة، والتغييرات اللي حصلت في السنوات السابقة في المجال التكنولوجيا تغييرات سريعة. فهل نحن فعلاً مستعدين لهذا التغيير؟ طبعاً صار في تحول في مجال التعلم، فعندنا منصات التعليم المفتوح. التغير اللي صار في منصات التعليم المفتوح أدت إلى تعزيز مبدأ التعلم المستمر، وأيضاً أدت إلى تعزيز مبدأ التعلم الذاتي. فالمنصات التعليمية هذه متوفرة 24/7، وما في حاجة لأن ننتقل من مكان إلى مكان. وطبعاً عندنا التزايد في استخدام المساعد الافتراضي بتقنية الذكاء الاصطناعي، مثل ما الكل يتكلم الحين عن الشات جي بي تي. هذا مثال من على المساعد الافتراضي. فالتزايد اللي صار على موضوع المساعد الافتراضي، فتم استخدام 4.2 مليار مساعد افتراضي في عام 2020، والمتوقع أيضاً تصاعد هذا الرقم ليصل إلى 8.4 مليار بحلول عام 2024. السؤال هنا إن مع ظهور كل هاي التكنولوجيا المبتكرة والحلول الرقمية بنحتاج إلى مهارات المستقبل لسد الفجوات بين الوضع الحالي والوضع المستقبلي. طبعاً مهارات المستقبل هي أيضاً تغيير في المايند سيت. يعني مثلاً إحنا التكنولوجيا هذه لازم هي تغير في التفكير البشري، تخلي العنصر البشري يتقبل التكنولوجيا بشكل مرن، وتكون في سهولة في تقبل التكنولوجيا. طبعا إذا تذكرون في جائحة كورونا الاجتماعات كلها كنا احنا نسويها عن طريق الأونلاين، بس قبلها ما كنا نتقبل هالشيء هذا. الاجتماع إذا ما كان حضوري، الأشخاص ما كانوا موجودين، طبعا يتكنسل الاجتماع. فمن جائحة كورونا احنا تعلمنا أن التكنولوجيا ومهارات المستقبل لها ما نقول أن مثلا أن هي تساعدنا في استمرارية الأعمال وفي زيادة الإنتاجية. الميتافيرس طبعا هو الانتقال من العالم الواقعي إلى العالم الافتراضي. في أكثر من 400 مليون مستخدم نشط شهرياً في عالم الميتافيرس. السؤال هنا، شو هو القاسم المشترك بين كل هذه المواضيع؟ إن المهارات مش موجودة قبل، هذه المهارات طلعت الحين. فلازم نفهم إحنا التوجهات المستقبلية في جميع القطاعات حتى نعزز جاهزيتنا لتحديات وفرص المستقبل. السؤال هنا، هل الحكومات مستعدة للتعامل مع الجرائم في الميتافيرس؟ طبعاً في الفترة الأخيرة بعد سمعنا عن شراء الأراضي على الميتافيرس. طبعاً شو هي الحقوق وما هي التشريعات؟ هل إحنا مستعدين لهذه التغييرات؟ هل إحنا مستعدين؟ الجواب بيكون نعم، بس في حالة واحدة، إذا إحنا استثمرنا في الكوادر البشرية وسلحنا نفسنا بمهارات المستقبل. طبعاً مع زيادة الاعتماد على التكنولوجيا والحلول المبتكرة، فبينت الدراسات أن في 50% من الموظفين سيحتاجون إلى إعادة تشكيل مهاراتهم بحلول 2025، و40% من المهارات الأساسية المطلوبة لسوق العمل بتتغير بحلول 2025. ففي مهارات تحتاج الاب سكيلينج وري سكيلينج، وفي مهارات بتحتاج الى ان هي ما نقول ان مهارات جديده نتعلمها، وفي مهارات مش محتاجينها. طبعا احنا في دوله الامارات العربيه المتحده من اهم اولوياتنا هو تطوير راس المال البشري. وطبعا احنا نقدر نحقق رؤى قيادتنا الرشيده بتطوير كفاءاتنا الوطنيه وتسليح موظفينا بمهارات المستقبل وتحقيق طموحات دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة عن طريق منصة جاهز. منصة جاهز هي منصة لتعزيز كوادرنا الوطنية بمهارات المستقبل. هي منصة تختص بمهارات المستقبل، تركز على 4 مجموعات رئيسية و20 مهارة فرعية. ال4 مجموعات الرئيسية هي مثل ما تشوفون: المهارات الرقمية، الاقتصاد الجديد، بيانات الذكاء الاصطناعي، ومهارات ال10X. منصة جاهز مستقبل المواهب الحكومية هي منصة تعليمية رقمية تتضمن مسارات تعليمية موحدة لكافة الفئات الوظيفية، ومرتبطة أيضاً بمنظومة الموارد البشرية. لكل مهارة شارة، ولكل موظف محفظة رقمية. عند انتهاء الموظف من كل مهارة تنزل هذه المهارة في محفظته الرقمية.
جيل جاهز.
هذا الفيديو اللي بنهي فيه
فرق عملنا جاهزة ونحن مستعدين.
يشهد العالم اليوم تغيراً متسارعاً في جميع المجالات.
ومع هذه المتغيرات تأتي تحديات حاملة معها مختلف
الفرص التي تمكننا من أن نكون أكثر استعداداً نحو المستقبل،
وأن نحول الرؤية الطموحة لوطننا إلى حقيقة ملموسة.
اليوم نحن نعيش مرحلة جديدة نحو ال50 القادمة، معاً نحو انطلاقة استثنائية
تتطلب منا التطور والتعلم مدى الحياة،
لنطور مواهبنا وننمي معرفتنا ونعزز جاهزيتنا للمستقبل الآن.
معاً نطلق منصة جاهز لمستقبل المواهب الحكومية،
أكبر منصة وطنية رقمية
متاحة لأكثر من 65,000 موهبة حكومية اتحادية،
تغطي 4 مجموعات من مهارات المستقبل:
المهارة الرقمية،
مهارات البيانات والذكاء الاصطناعي،
مهارة الاقتصاد الجديد،
مهارات 10X.
مثل ما شفتوا هذه المحفظة الرقمية اللي بتكون عند كل موظف، وطبعا كل موظف بيفتخر أنه عنده نفس هذه المهارة، نفس هذه المحفظة الرقمية اللي فيها 20 مهارة من مهارات المستقبل. وشكرا لكم جميعا، أشكركم على السماع.
إلى هنا حضورنا الكريم من أصحاب المعالي والسعادة نختتم فعاليات ملتقى الخبرات الخليجي لهذا العام، ونأمل أن نلتقي بكم مجددا العام القادم لنستمع لتجارب جديدة ونحتفي بإنجازات حكومية زاخرة تسهم في تحقيق تطلعاتنا الخليجية وأهدافنا المشتركة. شكرا على الحضور وشكرا المتحدثين والمستمعين، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.